good evening to all of you listening in live through the internet and maybe through a delayed emission of this broadcast. Tonight, the topic of discussion is the European emission trading system and how this system will look like after 2012. We are honored to have Avril Doyle, the rapporteur of this dossier in the Environment Committee, next to me. And tonight we have questions coming from all over Europe, and some of them are really technical on how citizens, scientists, industrials perceive this dossier and what they expect from the Parliament and what their concerns are. And a question that we got from Ireland and the Czech Republic had to do with the element of auctioning emission allowances. In the past, we saw those allowances allocated mainly for free to companies, but in the future, the proposal by the Commission talks about selling those allowances. And there is a concern that auctioning those allowances will increase the power prices for citizens. Is that risk justified, and how does the Parliament look at this?
An interesting question, and one that we've had persistently since the draft legislation, the draft proposal was before us. The reality is that for the vast majority of member states, auctioning of allowances as distinct from the free allowances given currently under the ETS to the power generation sector, the hydrocarbon power generation sector, should not in itself increase electricity prices. I'm not saying electricity prices won't go up, because the price of coal, the price of oil, the price of gas may well go up, and various other input prices in labour and insurance and all the rest. But the actual price of the tonne of carbon itself has already been taken by the power gen sector. They got free allowances, are getting free allowances at the moment in most of our member states. They have put the price of the carbon through to the end user, to the consumer, to the industrialist at the moment. And they have pocketed the windfall profits. In other words, for every tonne of carbon that they got an allowance for free from, they have, at today's price, about 26 euros a tonne. They have actually pocketed that 26 euros per tonne themselves. So the power gen sector have had huge windfall profits. The only change post-2012 is that we're saying the power gen sector must buy at auction the allowances for every tonne of carbon they emit, and the revenue from the auction of allowances will go to each member state, not the power gen sector. So already the price of carbon is factored into the consumer's electricity bill, and that will continue post-2012. So on this move alone, there should be no increase in the price of electricity.
We see that quite a lot of questions have to do with the economy. One element is a new term that has been introduced in the debate, is so-called carbon leakage. Companies, industrial installations leaving Europe due to the price of CO2 we are introducing here. How has this issue been debated in the Parliament, and what solutions for that risk does the Parliament offer at the moment? And at all, is it a justified cost to deal with that?
Well, carbon leakage is one of the most debated areas as well. You're picking the really hotspots, if you like, on the draft proposal. Basically, the whole issue of carbon leakage, particularly for carbon-intensive and energy-intensive sectors, is of major concern, and it is concern to me. It will only arise if an international agreement isn't equitable in how it treats different sectors internationally, if you like. In other words, if there's an encouragement because of the price, we in Europe, in our emissions trading system or our cap and trading system, increase the cost of a product, and the industrialist makes a decision to relocate, or the consumer makes a decision to purchase products from another country outside the EU that doesn't have the same carbon constraints, in other words, is not looking after the environment in terms of reducing their CO2 emissions. So this is what we're trying to deal with here. We have dealt with the carbon leakage sector very considerably in the Environment Committee's report on this area, and Environment Committee's report was discussed today. Initially, we had the first trialogue on this area. So it's an area that both the Presidency, the Parliament and the Parliament are extremely keen to get right. We will not disadvantage European industry, disadvantage or put at risk European jobs in a global agreement that isn't equitable in this area. If the agreement itself can't nail down all the areas of concern, there's the option of sectoral agreements, and there's also in our toolkit, if we have to, it'll be the last resort, border adjustment measures or border tariffs, which I feel would be allowable under the World Trade Organization's position, because we are protecting our environment, we're trying to reduce global CO2, we're trying to reduce the 2 degree centigrade target. We've been asked to do this at Bali by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change last December. We have a goal to have our legislation ready by December, 12 months in Copenhagen, and meanwhile we have Poznan convention in a couple of weeks' time, in 6 weeks' time, at which we hope to have some of the interim issues on the table and be, if you like, well on the way to a final global agreement in Copenhagen. Carbon leakage, putting at risk European industry, European jobs, is not what this Parliament wants to do. It's not what the Presidency wants to do. Indeed, I think the sectors concerned, the real at-risk sectors, if we don't have an equitable global agreement, will be happy enough with the outcome of what we agree, hopefully in first reading agreement this December. We're working very hard to bring as much certainty for any industries that have concerns, and there are industries with legitimate concerns. There are industries also, such as the cement industry, for example, that has processed CO2, that can't avoid emitting CO2 to make its final product, and all of that has been taken into consideration with a range of quantitative and qualitative criteria, so that sectors genuinely at risk will be looked after.
Thank you. I just want to introduce right now Member of Parliament Lena Ek, the rapporteur for the ITRE Industry Committee on the emissions trading dossier, and maybe drop in with a specific question that was dealt with in that committee very heavily, which is the carbon leakage issue, and how the ITRE committee handled that issue in relation to the Environment Committee.
Well, I could be very short, very much the same, actually. Meaning that first, I think always in a heated debate when you have a very difficult legislative proposal, you tend to exaggerate or underestimate different questions. I'm not saying that carbon leakage isn't a problem. We all know that we have to deal with this, but I'm making parallels with when I was a rapporteur on the Chemicals Directive, and what we had almost the same kind of discussion. And now when the legislation is in place, we could see that a lot of countries around Europe are starting to apply the same standards, and I think this will be the same here. So Mrs. Doyle just outlined what we've tried to do, and in addition to that, I should say that bilateral agreements with neighboring countries is also really important, like for the cement industry. And of course, if we get an international agreement, there is no problem. The problem is solved. If we don't, we have a lot of things to tackle, and one of the things is carbon leakage, and we have the proposals in place to identify the sectors and to see what we can do in case of a breakdown in the Copenhagen negotiations. But all of us who work with this are actually quite hopeful. If we from Europe can show that we don't only talk the talk but walk the walk in this area when it comes to climate change, I think what we hear, because both Mrs. Doyle and I meet regularly representatives from the United States and China and Japan and also Russia. And
just back from Russia.
Exactly. I'm glad you are back. And also the developing countries.